When it comes to the indigenous peoples of North America, images from movies and literature come to mind. Colorful feathers, brave warriors on horseback, the smoke of bonfires, and the sounds of battles. However, behind these vivid images, the reality of life and spirituality of these tribes, their everyday joys and tragedies, is often lost. Unlike the Mayan and Aztec civilizations in Central and South America, the Indians of North America did not build stone cities or complex state systems. There was no gold or shining armor, but there was another, no less significant empire. It was an empire of forests, steppes, and rivers, ruled by spirits, myths, and oral tradition. Before the arrival of Europeans, North America was a colorful tapestry of peoples and tribes scattered across the vast expanses of the continent. From the Arctic wastelands of Alaska to the sunny plains of Texas, from the Appalachians to the Great Lakes, from the deserts of Arizona to the forests of Canada, people lived in every corner whose lives were inextricably linked to the land and nature. The Iroquois, Apache, Navajo, Sioux, Cherokee, and many other tribes inhabited these lands, each with its own unique history and culture. We are talking about free tribes whose existence was subject to natural cycles. Their deeds were not reflected in the chronicles, and their names are little known outside their ancestral territories. Nevertheless, every day of their lives sounded like a hymn to the earth and sky, animals and spirits, love and military exploits, birth and transition to the afterlife. The younger generation listened to the chirping of birds and the soothing rustle of foliage. Wise elders passed on legends of the raven, the mighty bison, and mysterious spirits. Brave warriors went bison hunting in the vast prairies, while women skillfully wove the entire history of their clan into the patterns of canvases. These peoples were numerous, numbering over 500 ethnic groups, speaking many languages and dialects, differing in the originality of their customs, beliefs, and way of life. They lived in tipis and wigwams, erected earthen dwellings, and built complex settlements, led a nomadic lifestyle, following herds of bison, and cultivated fertile cornfields. Some tribes formed alliances, uniting to end internecine wars, while others fought bloody battles with their neighbors for the right to own hunting grounds, while still others lived in peace and harmony with the world around them from generation to generation. However, they were all united by a deep sense of unity with the world around them. For the Iroquois, Navajo, Sioux, Cherokee, and many other tribes, nature was not just a source of resources, but a sacred home, an animated being, and a wise mentor. They did not separate themselves from the animal world, rivers, skies, and forests. They believed in the inextricable connection of all living things, considering man only a part of the great cycle of life, whose task is not to exploit the land, but to maintain a harmonious coexistence with it. This world, filled with silent harmony and age-old wisdom, existing outside of written laws, fell victim to the invasion of newcomers, for whom the land was not a mother, but only an object of profit. These people, whose borders were determined not by natural migrations of animals, but by artificial lines on maps and in treaties, brought with them disease, bloody wars, and oblivion. As part of this lecture, listeners will embark on a virtual journey through the vanished world of the indigenous peoples of North America. We will talk about famous tribes and small clans, about their distinctive traditions and myths, about a way of life that is irretrievably lost, but whose echo can still be heard in the rustling of the wind over the endless plains and in the melodious trills of birds over the Appalachian Mountains. A story forgotten in school textbooks will be told, but one that deserves to be heard. Chapter 1 will be devoted to the tribes of North America, namely the settlement of peoples. Long before the appearance of European colonizers, the continent was densely populated. However, looking at the map of that time, the observer would not find the familiar outlines of cities and states. Instead, he would see a colorful mosaic of tribes and peoples, forming a complex and changeable pattern, like a river, sometimes drying up in drought, then filling up again during rains, or a herd of bison wandering across the endless prairies. The continent of North America has historically been a mosaic of diverse cultural and natural zones, each of which had a profound impact on the formation of the unique way of life of the indigenous population. In the northeastern part of the continent, surrounded by endless forests and mirror-like lakes, lived the Iroquois and Algonquin tribes. Their living space was characterized by lush greenery, high humidity, and moderate temperatures. In these favorable conditions, hunting for forest animals, fishing in numerous reservoirs, and agriculture on fertile soils flourished. The local inhabitants constructed spacious longhouses surrounded by cornfields and skillfully navigated the rivers in light canoes carved from single tree trunks. Further south, in what is now the southern United States, lived peoples who had adapted to life in wetlands, dense forests, and along the banks of full-flowing rivers. The Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole established large settlements, cultivated the land, and developed complex social structures that foreshadowed the emergence of early state formations. On the vast expanses of the Great Plains, where the relentless wind rustled through the tall grass stretching to the horizon, lived tribes of brave hunters and free nomads, the Sioux, Cheyenne, Comanche, and Arapaho. Their world was inextricably linked to the bison, which served as their primary source of food and materials, and to the horse, which became an indispensable aid in hunting and transportation. It is worth noting that horses only appeared among these tribes after the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors, which radically transformed their traditional way of life. The plains were characterized by their gigantic size and lack of clearly defined boundaries. The life of the nomadic tribes was dictated by the rhythm of bison herd migrations, which determined their movements and settlements. On the northwest coast of North America, stretching from harsh Alaska to sunny California, lived tribes whose fate was inextricably linked to the vast expanses of the sea. The Tlingit, Haida, Nootka, and other peoples demonstrated remarkable skill in building massive canoes that allowed them to navigate the waves in search of salmon, sea lions, and even huge whales. Their settlements were adorned with majestic totem poles, telling the stories of their clans and the exploits of their ancestors. The society of these tribes was characterized by a complex clan structure, where each person occupied a specific place. Along the picturesque banks of the Mississippi River and its numerous tributaries, in the fertile woodlands region, long before the arrival of European colonizers, flourished the mysterious Mississippian culture. Their descendants, the proud Natchez, Cahokia, Choctaw, and other tribes, built impressive earthen mounds which served as burial sites and platforms for temples and the dwellings of chiefs. They created large settlements connected by a developed network of trade routes which facilitated the exchange of goods and cultural ideas. In the arid southwest of North America, where vast deserts, deep canyons, and inaccessible mountain plateaus stretched, the Navajo, Apache, Hopi, and Pueblo tribes found their home. They displayed amazing ingenuity, learning to build sturdy dwellings from stone and clay, creating entire settlements seemingly hidden in the rocks and on the tops of hills to protect themselves from the scorching sun and enemies. These peoples successfully engaged in agriculture, growing corn and beans, as well as hunting deer and raising turkeys, providing themselves with food and clothing. In the harsh northern regions of Canada and Alaska, where permafrost, ice, and long polar nights reigned, lived the Inuit and Athabascan peoples. Their lives were subject to the relentless laws of nature. They hunted walruses, seals, and reindeer, obtaining food and materials for clothing and construction. As dwellings, they built igloos, dome-shaped houses made of snow blocks, and followed the migration of animals to provide themselves with food throughout the year. the North American continent resembled a living organism where there were no clear boundaries or a single center. But at the same time, there was active interaction and movement of various population groups. Indigenous tribes could move from their settled places, leaving their native territories under the influence of military conflicts, drought periods, enemy invasions, or in an effort to find new, richer hunting grounds. These migrations were cyclical and subject to the natural laws of nature. It is important to note that many tribes of North America were not stable. The pattern of settlement of peoples was constantly changing. Some tribes assimilated others, formed alliances, or, conversely, engaged in armed clashes, forcing neighbors to seek new places to live. Over the centuries, large-scale migrations took place. For example, the Iroquois expanded their possessions through wars of conquest, while the Apache, under pressure from other tribes, were forced to gradually move south. Of particular importance is the fact that for Native Americans, land was not an object of ownership in the sense that Europeans understood it. Indians did not draw boundaries on geographical maps, but perceived the land as an integral part of themselves, as part of the surrounding world, spirits, and the heritage of their ancestors. Their traditional routes, sacred places, and hunting grounds existed not in the form of legal documents, but were imprinted in songs, myths, and collective memory. Looking at a 10th century map of North America, a modern person encounters a world full of movement and freedom, yet strikingly complex. It was a world where peoples were not bound by borders, but lived in harmony with the cycles of nature. This unity with nature was the source of their age-old wisdom, which they carefully preserved until foreign sails appeared on the horizon. To imagine North America before the colonial era, one must abandon the familiar notion of homogeneous nations with a single culture and language. The world of the indigenous peoples of North America was a motley tapestry woven from thousands of unique patterns, each pattern symbolizing a distinct language, tradition, rite, song, or myth. This continent amazed with its multilingualism and diversity of ways of life and thought, while beyond the horizon loomed entirely different peoples with their own customs and ideas about the world order. The linguistic and cultural richness of the North American tribes is truly astonishing. Modern scholars count over 300 different languages belonging to several major language families and dozens of isolated languages with no known relatives. For comparison, in Europe at the time of Columbus's arrival, there were only a few major language groups. In North America, each valley and river could be home to a people speaking its own unique language. Among the most significant linguistic associations on the continent were the Algonquian, Iroquoian, Siouan, Athabascan, Uto-Aztecan, and Muskogean families. Alongside them existed unique language isolates, such as the Zuni language or the languages of the tribes inhabiting the Northwest Coast, whose linguistic features still arouse genuine interest among researchers. The Algonquian language family occupied vast territories from the Canadian forests to the Great Lakes region and the East Coast. Its representatives included peoples such as the Ojibwe, Penobscot, Delaware, Cherokee, and many others. Their languages were distinguished by their particular melodiousness and rich vocabulary, reflecting the diversity of the surrounding world: snow, water expanses, animal life, and boundless forests. The Iroquoian family was concentrated in the northeastern part of the continent and united tribes such as the Mohawk, Onondaga, Seneca, and Tuscarora. These peoples were famous not only for their linguistic traditions, but also for their developed political system. The famous Iroquois Confederacy was one of the most progressive alliances of its time. The Siouan family covered vast expanses of the Great Plains and included the Lakota, Dakota, Crow, and Cheyenne tribes. Their language and culture were closely connected with the spirit of the steppes and the lifestyle of hunters. Each tribe had its own unique dialects and rituals, but they were all united by reverence for the Great Spirit and a holistic worldview. In the southwestern part of the continent, the Uto-Aztecan language groups dominated, with the languages of the Hopi, Comanche, and Shoshone being particularly prominent. These tribes, living in the harsh conditions of desert and canyon landscapes, formed unique cultures combining agriculture and hunting. Athabascan languages were also widespread in the north and southwest, including the Apache and Navajo, peoples who managed to adapt to the most diverse climatic zones, from the frosty Canadian forests to the arid deserts of Arizona. However, linguistic diversity was only a reflection of deep cultural differences. Behind each language was a whole world of unique customs, beliefs, social structures, and rituals. No two tribes were exactly identical. Some based their way of life on agriculture, others on hunting, and still others on gathering and fishing. Social organization also differed greatly, from complex hierarchies with chiefs and councils of elders to free communities where decisions were made collectively. Clothing, utensils, art, and even architecture varied from tribe to tribe. The Iroquois built spacious longhouses for large families and clans. Tribes living on the plains used portable teepees that could be easily disassembled and transported following migrating herds of bison. In the desert regions of the Southwest, dwellings were built of stone and clay, skillfully fitting into the landscape of rocks and canyons. The beliefs and spiritual rituals of the indigenous peoples of North America represented a kaleidoscope of worldviews. In some communities, they worshipped an almighty spirit and revered the memory of their ancestors. In others, they composed myths about the trickster coyote. And in still others, they saw the eagle or raven as guides between realities. All tribes were united by an unwavering belief in the power of the animal world. Sacred trees, impregnable mountains, and life-giving bodies of water. However, the rites, symbolism, and ritual chants differed as strikingly as the shades of sunset in different parts of the planet. Even within the same language group, the differences were astounding. The Cheyenne language was completely incomprehensible to the Dakota, even though both peoples inhabited the prairies. The dialect of one tribe could be entirely foreign to its neighbors living across the river, but this linguistic and cultural diversity did not become an obstacle. On the contrary, it served as the foundation for the development of trade routes, diplomatic ties, military alliances, and even large-scale festivities, where different peoples gathered to share stories, exchange goods, and perform songs. In this polyphony, in these mesmerizing dances and unique crafts, in this riot of colors of myths and costumes, in this endless cycle of cultures, lay a profound wisdom. The indigenous peoples of North America lived in a world where they recognized that there was no single right path, no single absolute truth, no single correct way of existence. Their world was woven from diversity, and they perceived it as a natural and immutable order of things. In our day, when the former diversity of the indigenous peoples of North America has been preserved only in echoes of reservations and on the pages of scholarly works, it is difficult to recreate in the imagination the rich tapestry of cultures that once existed here. However, by turning to the past, we can realize that before the arrival of Columbus, North America was not a lifeless space, as the colonizers mistakenly believed, but was filled with distinctive voices, bright colors, melodious songs, and captivating stories, each of which was unique in its own way. Among the colorful kaleidoscope of tribes inhabiting the North American continent, a special place rightfully belongs to the people whose distinctive history and culture have left an indelible mark in the annals of the past, palpable even today. This is the Iroquois, a people who managed to transform disparate tribes into a powerful union known as the Great League of Peace, or the Iroquois Confederacy. The Iroquois Confederacy was undoubtedly one of the most remarkable phenomena of the pre-colonial era on the continent. Its emergence was a turning point not only for the Iroquois themselves, but for the entire region as a whole, having a tremendous impact on the political situation, cultural development, and even on the worldview of European colonizers, who later borrowed ideas of democracy and federalism from the structure of this unique confederation. At the dawn of their existence, the Iroquois tribes, like many other peoples, were fragmented into separate clans and communities, often mired in hostility and internecine strife. In the northeastern part of the American continent, between the majestic St. Lawrence and Hudson rivers, in the dense forests and fertile valleys, lived the Mohawk, Onondaga, Seneca, and Cayuga. Their territories stretched across the modern states of New York and Pennsylvania, and also covered part of the Canadian province of Ontario. In those troubled times, they were bound not so much by a common culture as by a centuries-old history of bloody conflicts and mutual raids, sowing death and destruction. Legend has it that the unification of the Iroquois tribes became possible thanks to Deganawida, a prophet and peacemaker who went down in history as the Great Peacemaker. This outstanding man, or according to some, half-human, half-magician, brought the warring tribes the long-awaited news of the coming of an era of great peace. In his noble cause, he was assisted by Hiawatha, a celebrated orator and chief whose personal tragedy and unquenchable thirst for reconciliation made him an ideal companion for Deganawida. According to ancient legends, Deganawida and Hiawatha managed to unite 5 powerful tribes into the League of Peace, which included the Mohawk, Onondaga, Seneca, Cayuga, and Oneida. After some time, the Tuscarora joined the Union, and the Confederation became known as the Six Nations, becoming a formidable force in the region. The political structure of the Iroquois Confederacy is admirable for its depth and foresight. The leaders of each tribe were given the right to a decisive vote in the Council of the Confederacy, which met to discuss and make decisions on matters of war and peace, trade relations, and other important aspects of life. A fundamental difference from modern democratic systems was the way decisions were made. Instead of a simple majority vote, unanimous consensus was required. Only when full agreement was reached between all the chiefs was a decision considered adopted. This system implied the highest level of patience, the ability to conduct constructive dialogue, and mutual respect among all participants. Despite the unification, each tribe retained internal independence and self-government, but they were all bound by the Great Declaration of Peace, an oral code of laws and customs passed down from generation to generation. The Iroquois themselves called their confederation Haudenosaunee, which translates to people of the Longhouse. This image had a profound symbolic meaning. The Confederacy was represented as a single dwelling, where each nation was a separate hearth, but all resided under a common roof. The social structure of the Iroquois was complex and meticulously organized. Society was built on the basis of matrilineality, meaning kinship was determined through the female line. Women enjoyed significant influence and authority. They elected chiefs, had the right to remove them, and played a key role in public life. Men, in turn, were warriors, hunters, and political figures. But it was the women who were the keepers of traditions, land, and ancestral memory, ensuring the continuity of generations and the preservation of cultural heritage. The Iroquois Confederacy was more than just a military alliance. It was a carefully constructed political, social, and spiritual union, pursuing the noble goal of ending bloody internecine strife and creating a favorable environment where different peoples could coexist in harmony and mutual understanding. The Iroquois sincerely believed that only by putting an end to the endless wars with each other could they form a strong and independent community. Thanks to their developed internal organization, the Iroquois became one of the most influential forces in northeastern America. They controlled vital trade routes, skillfully navigated the interests of various European powers, concluded strategic alliances, and waged wars only when absolutely necessary. During the era of colonial conflicts, the Iroquois played the role of key allies and adversaries, significantly influencing the course of events far beyond their own territories. Their famous league became the personification of how peoples exhausted by internal strife can unite, creating a new, powerful, and sustainable form of social order. The fundamental principles of their union, such as achieving peace through consensus, respect for the autonomy of each nation, and recognition of the importance of the female voice in governance, have not lost their relevance even today. Although only echoes remain of the League's former greatness, the memory of it continues to live on through the ages. It is no secret that the U.S. Constitution and other fundamental documents of the New World were largely inspired by the unique structure of this confederation. The ideas of freedom, self-determination, and careful stewardship of the land laid down as the foundation of the League have become invisible threads firmly woven into the fabric of modern history. When speaking of the Iroquois, it is important to remember that behind the complex political structures were ordinary people, hunters nourished by the generosity of the forest, farmers cultivating cornfields, women keeping the warmth of the hearth, children curiously exploring the world, wise storytellers passing down ancient legends by word of mouth, and fearless warriors defending their people. Every day they met the dawn, going hunting or working in the fields, and in the evenings they gathered around the bonfires, listening to the elders' tales of the glorious past and the deeds of the great peacemaker. This people proved by their example that true strength lies not in the number of weapons and captured territories, but in the ability to live in harmony with each other, respecting differences and valuing unity. When it comes to the great tribes of North America, it is impossible to ignore the peoples whose names have become symbols of freedom, defiance, and tragic pages of history. The Apache, Navajo, Sioux, and Cherokee. Their fates are inextricably linked to the fate of an entire continent. Their names are immortalized in legends and songs, and their stories are forever imprinted in the memory of the land they walked for many centuries. The Apache and Navajo are children of the deserts, proud rocks, and deep canyons of the Southwest. Their roots go back to the distant Athabascan language family. It is believed that their ancestors came from the north, from the territories of modern Canada and Alaska, and only after centuries did they find their home in the Southwest. By the time they met the Europeans, they had already perfectly mastered the art of survival in the harsh conditions of deserts and high mountain plateaus, learning to draw life from seemingly lifeless lands. The Apache, these tireless nomads, warriors, and hunters, lived to the rhythm of constant movement, where the primary tasks were obtaining food, searching for life-giving moisture, and ensuring security. Their life was organized around temporary dwellings, easily disassembled and moved from place to place. They united in small, mobile groups, honing their skills in guerrilla warfare. Thanks to their fighting skills, incredible speed, and deep knowledge of the terrain, the Apache became virtually elusive adversaries. The culture of the Apache was permeated with a spirit of freedom and independence. They rejected the idea of centralized power, preferring each family association to make its own decisions. The chief did not have unlimited power. He had to earn the respect and support of his tribesmen with his deeds and wisdom. In their society, there was no sharp divide between rich and poor. Everything obtained through hunting or raids was divided equally among all members of the community, promoting shared prosperity. The neighboring Navajo people, who shared common ancestry with the Apache, chose a different path of development. While the Apache maintained a nomadic lifestyle, the Navajo gradually transitioned to a sedentary existence. They built hogans, round or octagonal dwellings made of wood and clay, engaged in agriculture, growing corn and beans, and raised sheep and goats acquired from Spanish conquistadors. The Navajo created a rich and multifaceted culture, harmoniously blending the traditions of nomads and farmers. Their art of weaving rugs, crafting silver jewelry, complex ceremonies, and captivating songs remain an integral part of their unique identity to this day. Navajo cosmology is characterized by complexity and depth. They believe in sacred spirits dwelling in the mountains, recount legends of primordial heroes who created the world, and continue to perform healing ceremonies that organically combine singing, the creation of vibrant sand paintings, and ritual dances. On the vast American Great Plains lived the Sioux, a tribe whose name is etched in gold in the history of the continent. The self-designation of this people, Dakota or Lakota, translates to allies or friends, reflecting their commitment to unity and mutual support. The life of the Sioux unfolded in the boundless prairies, where the horizon faded into the haze, and the land swayed in the wind like an endless sea. The culture of this people was inextricably linked to the bison, which served as their source of sustenance, material for clothing and shelter, and bones for crafting tools. Before the arrival of horses, the Sioux led a relatively settled life, but with the arrival of Spanish conquistadors in the 15th century and the spread of horses, their existence was forever transformed. The Sioux became unsurpassed riders and hunters, whose skill inspired admiration and awe. The horse became their loyal ally and a symbol of freedom, allowing them to cover vast distances, hunt with unprecedented efficiency, and wage wars with neighboring tribes. Sioux society was organized into kinship groups where important decisions were made by the council of elders and chiefs, whose wisdom and experience served as a compass for the entire tribe. Qualities such as courage, generosity, and care for others were highly valued in Sioux culture. Despite the existing cult of the warrior, the Sioux deeply respected peace and nature, striving to live in harmony with the surrounding world. It is also worth mentioning the Cherokee, a people whose home was far from the vast plains and prairies, in the picturesque mountains and forests of the southeastern North America. The self-designation of this tribe, Anievwia, translates to the real people, which emphasizes their uniqueness and deep connection to their culture. Unlike nomadic peoples, the Cherokee tribe demonstrated a commitment to a settled way of life, building sturdy dwellings of wood and clay. Their settlements were adorned with fields of corn, beans, and pumpkins, attesting to developed agriculture. Cherokee society was characterized by a well-thought-out social and political organization, where a matrilineal system determined the order of inheritance through the maternal line. Women were respected and had a voice in important decisions, could dissolve marriages, and own land. Issues of war and peace were decided at the Council of Chiefs, and the spiritual life of each village was guided by its own leader. A special place in the Cherokee annals is occupied by the emergence of a unique writing system. In the early 19th century, Sequoyah, a man without formal education, developed a syllabic alphabet, opening the way for his people to a written culture. Newspapers, books, and laws became available in their native language, which contributed to the rapid development of society and its desire to adapt to changing conditions. However, like many other indigenous peoples, the Cherokee faced a tragic fate. In the 1830s, the U.S. government passed the Indian Removal Act, forcing them to leave their lands. The Cherokee resisted desperately, defending their rights in the courts, but despite all efforts, they were defeated. From the pages of history emerges a tragic picture. The indigenous peoples of America, deprived of their native lands, were forced to embark on a grueling journey, which went down in history as the Trail of Tears. Countless lives were cut short in harsh conditions, from piercing cold, excruciating hunger, and raging diseases. Only a few managed to reach the designated reservations in the west of the continent. Apache, Navajo, Sioux, and Cherokee, 4 proud peoples whose fates are intertwined with threads of light and shadow. Different in linguistic roots, cultural traditions, and ways of life, they were united by an inextricable connection to the land of their ancestors, a reverent preservation of the memory of the past, and an unquenchable thirst for freedom. Their voices still sound in the rustle of the wind over the endless prairies, in the silence of deep canyons, and in the mysterious whisper of the forests. Their stories are a testament to courageous resistance, incredible resilience, and unwavering dignity in the face of unimaginable tragedy. If you mentally transport yourself to the heart of North America, you'll be greeted by a majestic panorama of boundless prairies, a cradle of grass stretching from the rugged Rocky Mountains to the mighty Mississippi River, from the vast Canadian prairies to the plains of scorching Texas. Here live tribes whose names have become legend: nomads, fearless warriors, skilled hunters, true children of the steppes. The Cheyenne, Comanche, Crow, Arapaho, Kiowa, Paiute, and many other peoples of the Great Plains did not build stone cities or know the intricacies of writing. Their rich history was passed down orally, sounded in melodious songs, and captured in rhythmic dances. They owned these lands not by right enshrined on paper, but through a deep knowledge of every corner, every trail, every pasture, and even the slightest movement of clouds in the sky. At the very heart of the existence of the indigenous peoples of the American prairies stood the bison, a symbol of life and prosperity. This magnificent animal was their source of everything necessary. Its flesh provided food. Its hides were transformed into sturdy dwellings and warm clothing. Its bones became tools and deadly weapons. Its sinews were turned into strong bowstrings, and its fat provided warmth and light during long winter nights. Bison hunting was not just a way to obtain food, but a sacred act filled with deep meaning, an expression of gratitude to nature, and an integral part of the eternal cycle of life. The arrival of the horse in the 18th century was a turning point in the history of these tribes, forever changing their way of life. Having gained speed and freedom of movement, hunting became an exciting and dangerous adventure. The tribes became nomadic, turning into unsurpassed horsemen as if born of the wind and the boundless expanses of the prairies. Tipis, conical tents skillfully sewn from bison hides and supported by wooden poles, became the embodiment of their nomadic lifestyle. These dwellings were easily disassembled and moved from place to place, allowing the tribes to follow the bison herds. Children grew up in nature, learning to write, shoot a bow, and understand the language of nature from an early age, learning its secrets and laws. However, the world of the indigenous peoples of North America was not limited to the vast plains. In the dense forests of the Northeast lived other peoples, such as the Algonquian tribes, Mohawks, Ojibwe, Penobscot, and Potawatomi. Their lives unfolded in harmony with the surrounding nature, among clear lakes and rivers, under the shade of ancient trees. They engaged in hunting, fishing, and agriculture, growing the famous Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash, which formed the basis of their diet. Their homes, wigwams, were dome-shaped dwellings covered with tree bark and animal skins. These tribes formed alliances, exchanged goods, held colorful festivals in honor of the bountiful harvest, and passed down ancient legends from generation to generation about heroes who created the world from a drop of water and a petal of a flower. On the northwest coast of North America, where rain and fog rain and majestic spruces and cedars soar skyward, lived the distinctive tribes of the Tlingit, Haida, Nootka, and Salish. Their culture, closely intertwined with the marine element, forest riches, and art, was strikingly different from the traditions of the peoples inhabiting the plains and forests. The society of these tribes was characterized by a complex hierarchical structure, where the clan aristocracy rose above the rest, and slavery was an integral part of the social system. Their Dwellings were impressive cedar structures adorned with intricate carvings depicting spirits and animals. Vertical sculptures, known as totem poles, served as unique chronicles, telling the story of the clan and its ancestors. Canoes, created by the hands of these masters, were true works of art, long, graceful, and reliable. They allowed them to navigate the harsh waters of the Pacific Ocean. The potlatch festivals became a vivid manifestation of their culture, during which chiefs demonstrated their wealth, generously distributed gifts, and strengthened social ties within the tribe. In the mountains and deserts of the southwest of the continent, where the scorching sun tests the strength of all living things, the Hopi, Pueblo, Zuni, and Taos found their home. They built unique villages of stone and clay, known as pueblos, on the inaccessible peaks of plateaus and in deep canyons. These multi-level structures, resembling honeycombs with ladders and passages, served as reliable protection from enemies and harsh climatic conditions. Despite the arid climate and infertile soils, the Hopi and Pueblo displayed miracles of ingenuity in agriculture, growing corn, beans, squash, and cotton, providing themselves with food and necessary resources. The religious beliefs of these peoples were characterized by an abundance of rituals and dance performances in which entire communities, numbering hundreds of people, participated. They worshipped katsinas, spirits that protected the fertility of the land and bestowed much-needed rain. These spirits were embodied in skillfully crafted dolls and terrifying masks. Katsina dances, dedicated to these deities, were considered among the most impressive and colorful spectacles on the entire continent. In the western and northern regions lived the Athabascan peoples, such as the Dogrib, Chippewayan, Kutchin, and Chilcotin. Their existence took place in the harsh conditions of the vast taiga, inaccessible mountains, and paralyzing cold. They led the lives of hunters and fishermen, constantly moving after herds of caribou, catching fish in freezing rivers, and building their dwellings from tree bark and animal skins. In the far north, in the realm of eternal snow and ice, lived the Inuit. Although they are often considered separate from the Indian peoples, they were also an integral part of the diverse world of the indigenous peoples of North America. Their life was a continuous struggle for survival, hunting seals and whales, building igloos from snow blocks, and rapidly moving on dog sleds across the vast tundra. All these tribes, from the fearless hunters who conquered the plains to the skilled fishermen who lived on the coast, from the hard-working farmers who cultivated desert lands to the freedom-loving nomads who roamed the northern expanses, formed an amazing and multifaceted world. A world where there were no artificial boundaries, only those established by nature itself, where the diversity of languages and customs did not prevent harmonious coexistence with the environment and reverence for the spirits of the earth. Now, when many of the unique cultures of the indigenous peoples of America have been almost wiped off the face of the earth, or are living out their days in reservations, it is difficult to imagine how multifaceted and colorful their world was. However, the legacy of these civilizations continues to live in the rustle of feather grass, in the lapping of waves, in legends and melodies that are carried by the wind over the vast prairies and dense forests. Chapter 3 is dedicated to the way of life and everyday life of the Indians, namely the first part, which examines hunting, agriculture, and crafts. If myths and songs were the spiritual component of the indigenous people of North America, then their daily life was the material basis of existence. All aspects of their lives, from the objects they created to the sources of their vitality, were inextricably linked to the land they walked on, the endless starry sky, and the rivers and forests that served as their home. Their life was subject to the rhythms of nature, the changing seasons, the habits of animals, and the vagaries of the weather. The livelihoods of the tribes were based on three cornerstones: hunting, gathering, and agriculture. Depending on climatic conditions and landscape features, some peoples specialized in one thing, while others skillfully combined all three methods of obtaining food. Hunting played a vital role, especially for the tribes that lived in the vast Great Plains, in the northern forests, and in the Arctic regions. This was not just obtaining food, but a true art, requiring considerable patience, observation, and deep respect for the prey from the hunter. On the plains, bison hunting turned into a real epic. The Sioux, Cheyenne, Comanche, and other tribes followed huge herds of these animals using horses and developing complex tactics. Often, hunters drove bison to the edge of a cliff or into specially prepared pens. After a successful hunt, absolutely everything that could be obtained from the killed animal was used. The meat was dried or smoked, the skins were used to cover tipis, traditional dwellings, and make clothing. Bones were used to make tools, tendons were used as threads, and the stomach was turned into a convenient vessel. In the shade of dense forests and on the shores of the vast Great Lakes, an exciting drama of hunting unfolded, where the main characters were noble deer, mighty bears, hard-working beavers, and various birds. In the harsh north, in the realm of eternal ice, hunters pursued graceful caribou, huge walruses, and slippery seals. A skilled hunter had to have encyclopedic knowledge of animal behavior, their seasonal migrations, and favorite habitats. Hunting required not only impeccable camouflage skills, but also skillful possession of a bow and spear, and, later, firearms brought by Europeans. However, despite all its importance, hunting could not provide food for all tribes. The second pillar on which the life of many peoples rested was agriculture, which reached its peak in the fertile southeastern and southwestern lands. The Cherokee, Pueblo, Hopi, and Natchez, these peoples turned agriculture into a true art based on the cultivation of three sacred crops: corn, beans, and squash, known as the Three Sisters. These plants were grown together in an amazing symbiosis. The corn provided sturdy support for the climbing beans, the beans enriched the soil with nitrogen, and the broad leaves of the pumpkin protected the earth from the scorching sun and drying winds. This method was not only practical, but also symbolized the harmony and mutual assistance that prevailed in society. Agriculture required tireless labor and dedication. Fields were cleared by hand using primitive hoes made from animal bones and wood. Irrigation canals, which watered the arid lands, were dug by hand, drop by drop, bringing the long-awaited harvest closer. The harvested crop was common property, belonging to the entire community, and the responsibility for its cultivation and storage rested on the shoulders of the women, the keepers of the hearth and fertility. In addition to the Three Sisters, sunflower, amaranth, and tobacco were also grown. The latter held a special place in the spiritual life of the Indians. Its smoke rose to the heavens during ritual ceremonies. It was presented to the spirits as a sacred gift, and it was smoked during important councils to gain wisdom and make a considered decision. In coastal areas and along riverbanks, the life of indigenous peoples was closely intertwined with fishing. Salmon, cod, majestic catfish, and regal sturgeon became the staple diet for tribes such as the Iroquois, Algonquins, and Tlingits. Fishermen skillfully wove nets and constructed traps from flexible tree roots, strong vines, and sturdy animal sinews. Fishing was not just a way to obtain food, but also a sacred ritual, an expression of gratitude to the spirits that ruled over the water element. Gathering also played an important role in their lives. Women and children went into the forests and fields to collect juicy berries, nutritious nuts, medicinal roots, wild fruits, and medicinal herbs. These seasonal gatherings were accompanied by special rites of thanksgiving to the forces of nature. Gathering was subject to strict rules. It was forbidden to uproot plants and to take more than was necessary for food. A rich craft culture developed based on these occupations. Crafts were an integral part of everyday life. and the items created served not only practical but also spiritual purposes. Men skillfully crafted weapons, powerful bows, sharp arrows, deadly spears, and versatile knives. The bow was the main tool for hunting and warfare, and the secrets of its manufacture were passed down from generation to generation. Arrowheads were carefully sharpened from flint, obsidian, or strong bone, and the fletching was made from bright feathers. Each arrow carried a piece of the clan's strength and the hunter's skill. Women created beautiful clothing, skillfully wove baskets, wove durable fabrics, and molded elegant ceramics from clay. Clothing was not just protection from the weather, but also reflected status and belonging to a particular tribe. The skins of bison, deer, and moose were decorated with intricate embroidery, colorful beads, porcupine quills, and bright feathers. Each pattern told the story of the clan or narrated the life path of the owner. Weaving occupied a special place in the culture of Native Americans in North America. Skilled craftsmen from the Navajo, Hopi, and other southwestern tribes created amazing carpets and blankets, whose patterns served not only as a decoration for the home, but also as a kind of symbolic code, reflecting ideas about the world order and preserving the memory of distant ancestors. Ceramic products, created by the hands of women from Pueblo and other tribes, were striking in their elegance and grace of form. These clay vessels, intended for storing water and food, also played an important role in various rituals and ceremonies. Each ornament applied to the surface of the vessel carried a certain meaning, being part of a kind of dialogue with the surrounding world. Musical instruments such as flutes, drums, and rattles were made by hand and used during dances, celebrations, and ritual ceremonies. Their melodious sounds accompanied all spheres of Indian everyday life, from hunting and agriculture to wedding celebrations and initiation rites. Everything created by the hands of the North American Indians, whether it was household items or works of art, combined practical use and sacred meaning. Their crafts were a direct continuation of their worldview, a way of expressing gratitude to the spirits of nature and establishing a connection between generations. It was in these everyday concerns, in the process of hunting and agriculture, in craft workshops, and during the performance of songs, in the preparation of food and the upbringing of children, that a unique culture was born and developed, which newcomers from another continent often could not understand and appreciate. But it was in this inconspicuous, at first glance, rhythm of life that the true beauty and inexhaustible power of the vanished world of North American tribes lay. Chapter 2. Dwelling, Attire, Sustenance. To truly understand the worldview of Native Americans, one must step inside their dwellings, feel the texture of their clothing, and experience the aromas of their cuisine. Their daily lives were simple, yet infused with a profound philosophy, a knack for taking only what was necessary from Mother Nature to sustain life, and transforming those resources into objects of beauty. The architecture of Native American settlements directly reflected their way of life and the surrounding environment. In regions where tribes led nomadic lives, their homes were designed for portability and ease of construction. In areas where people preferred a sedentary lifestyle, substantial and spacious structures were erected. On the vast plains, teepees dominated, conical tents consisting of wooden poles covered with bison hides. These dwellings were easily dismantled and transported following migrating herds. The teepee's design, with its conical shape and opening at the top, effectively vented smoke. While the walls provided reliable protection from gusts of wind and scorching heat, teepees were the epitome of nomadic life, symbolizing lightness, reliability, and mobility, much like the prairie itself. In the northeastern woodlands, the Iroquois and Algonquins built longhouses, elongated wooden structures reaching up to 30 meters in length. Several related families lived within a single longhouse. Inside, Hearths served as sources of heat and light. Meat was cured, children played, and the older generation shared centuries of wisdom through storytelling. In the southern regions, among dense forests and marshy swamps, indigenous peoples such as the Cherokee, Seminole, and Choctaw erected their dwellings, simple yet reliable shelters from the elements. Their homes, whether round or rectangular in plan, were topped with roofs of palm leaves or bark, providing coolness in the heat and protection from torrential rains. On the northwest coast, majestic longhouses built from cedar stretched along the landscape. The facades of these structures were adorned with intricate carvings, and totem poles recounting the rich history of the clan stood at the entrance. Entire families found refuge inside these spacious houses, and the buildings themselves became centers of community life where important matters were decided and significant events were celebrated. In the vast deserts of the Southwest, the Pueblo, Hopi, and Zuni peoples created unique dwellings of clay and stone, seemingly merging with the surrounding landscape. These multi-story complexes with courtyards and ladders provided reliable protection from the scorching summer sun and retained warmth in the winter, sheltering inhabitants from sandstorms and adversaries. The Navajo had their hogans, round or octagonal structures made of wood and earth, with a single door facing east to greet the rising sun. In the harsh conditions of the far north, the Inuit built igloos, dome-shaped houses made of snow that, despite their apparent fragility, were warm and reliable shelters from the Arctic frosts. Each dwelling was not merely a place to live, but a reflection of the worldview and way of life of the indigenous peoples. Native Americans built their homes striving for harmony with nature, using local materials and taking into account the characteristics of the climate, thus creating unique and sustainable architectural forms. The clothing of Native Americans mirrored their way of life, climatic conditions, and social standing. Despite the unique traditions inherent to each region, all tribes shared a desire for functionality and aesthetic appeal. On the vast plains, men wore pants and shirts made from durable deer or bison leather, providing reliable protection from the elements. Women wore elaborately decorated dresses adorned with beads, porcupine quills, and delicate fringe. Comfortable moccasins, which were lined with soft fur in winter for warmth and comfort, completed the outfit. In forested areas, where the climate was milder, clothing was lightweight and flexible. Algonquin women preferred dresses of fine deerskin, while men wore loincloths and luxurious fur cloaks, symbolizing their status and courage. In the arid lands of the Southwest, clothing was made from cotton and leather, providing protection from the scorching sun and thorny plants. Women of the Hopi and Pueblo tribes wore elegant dresses, artfully cinched with belts to accentuate their slender figures, while men wore light capes that did not restrict movement. The Navajo were renowned for their exquisite silver and turquoise jewelry, which complemented their unique appearance. In the Northwest, where nature generously provided resources, clothing was made from cedar bark, animal hides, plant fibers, and even dog hair. Magnificent cloaks, richly embroidered with shells and beads, served not only as protection from the elements, but also as a symbol of high social status. In the harsh far north, where life was inextricably linked to the sea, the Inuit skillfully sewed warm parkas from durable walrus and seal skins, carefully insulating them with soft reindeer fur to withstand the fierce frosts. Every element of the Native American clothing reflected the surrounding world, full of mysteries and enigmas. Intricate ornaments, embroidery, and shapes had deep sacred meaning, telling the story of the clan, heroic deeds, the inextricable connection with the spirits of ancestors, and harmony with nature. In conclusion, it is worth emphasizing that food is the cornerstone of the existence and culture of any people. The diet of the indigenous people of North America depended entirely on the environment and available resources. On the vast plains, the main source of food was bison meat, which was processed in various ways. It was dried in the sun, smoked over a fire, or grilled over an open flame. Pemmican was made from minced meat, animal fat, and wild berries, a high-calorie and nutritious mixture that could retain its properties for many months. In wooded areas and on the shores of lakes, the basis of the diet was venison, bear meat, and various fish. In addition, nuts, juicy berries, and nutritious roots were eaten. In some regions, hunters hunted beavers, nimble raccoons, and various birds. In the arid desert regions of the Southwest, Indians cultivated corn, beans, and pumpkins, and also ate cacti, roots, and the meat of small animals adapted to harsh conditions. Women carefully stored corn supplies in skillfully made ceramic vessels, protecting them from rodents and moisture. On the northwest coast of the Pacific Ocean, the diet was based on salmon, various mollusks, and seafood. In addition, nuts and wild plants were eaten. In the harsh conditions of the far north, vital products were seals, whales, fish, caribou meat, and berries collected in the summer. Food for the Indians was not just a means of sustaining life, but also an integral part of spiritual rituals. Before the start of the hunt, offerings were made to the spirits of animals, and before each meal, words of gratitude were spoken for the food given. Eating together was an act of unity and an important part of social life, strengthening social ties. It is in these simple at first glance details, such as dwellings, clothing, and food, that the true picture of the life of the North American Indians is revealed. Their way of life was characterized by harmony, balance, and was filled with deep spiritual content. There was no place for excesses in their lives, but there was everything necessary for a decent life and a sense of happiness. In the third part of the narrative, it is necessary to pay special attention to the place occupied by women and children in the society of the indigenous peoples of North America. European chroniclers, who came from patriarchal foundations, often could not comprehend the full depth and significance of the role of women in Indian tribes. For many of these peoples, women were not just keepers of the hearth, but also the embodiment of the continuation of the clan, the connection with the land, and life itself. They were not the weaker sex, as the colonizers imagined, but were an integral part of both everyday life and the spiritual world of the tribe. It is important to emphasize that the role of women in Indian society was determined not by power in the usual sense, but by its inextricable connection with the earth and the gift of giving birth to new life. A woman symbolized fertility, the continuation of the clan, acted as a protector of the hearth and a keeper of traditions. In some tribes, such as the Iroquois, Cherokee, and Navajo, the clan was passed down through the maternal line, which meant that it was the mother who determined the inheritance and social status of her children. Women owned land and dwellings, had the right to elect and remove leaders, actively participated in councils, and controlled the distribution of resources. While men went hunting and war, it was the women who held in their hands the threads that weave the social structure of the tribe. In everyday life, women gathered and prepared food, mastered various crafts, and raised children. They skillfully wove baskets, sewed clothes, wove carpets, and made dishes. Their deep knowledge of medicinal herbs, weather phenomena, and animal habits was passed down from generation to generation, constituting a priceless heritage. However, the role of women was not limited to domestic issues. In many tribes, there were women's societies and clans that played an important role in the life of the community. In the Iroquois tribes, women gathered for a council where they raised issues concerning the future of the leaders, the conclusion of peace agreements, and the resolution of conflict situations. History knows examples of women warriors who, on an equal footing with men, participated in hunting and battles. Among the Cherokee, women could become leaders, and even lead military campaigns. In the spiritual sphere, women were entrusted with the role of keepers of sacred knowledge. They held initiation ceremonies for girls, passing on secrets of crafts, myths, and songs. Female magic was closely tied to fertility, healing, and protection of the family hearth. Motherhood was held in special reverence. The birth of a child was considered a great blessing, and the mother was chosen. Pregnant women were protected, and special ceremonies were held in their honor. After childbirth, the mother and newborn were in a state of rest and seclusion. Children in Native American society were not seen as miniature versions of adults or as empty vessels to be filled with knowledge. They were considered continuers of the clan, bearers of ancestral memory and hope for the future. Childhood was a time of freedom and learning, not a time of strict restrictions. From a young age, children were involved in tribal life. Girls helped their mothers around the house, learning to gather berries, prepare food, and sew clothes. Boys were taken hunting, taught how to use a bow, track animals, and understand the language of nature. In traditional Native American societies, the education of the younger generation was based not on punishment, but on engaging games, instructive stories, and imitation of experienced adults. Wise elders, like living books, passed on sacred myths and ancient legends to children, teaching them the language of their ancestors and symbolic gestures. In an atmosphere of all-encompassing love, deep respect, and tireless care, the new generation grew up. An important stage in the life of every young member of the tribe was the initiation rites, symbolizing his or her transition into adulthood and acceptance of new responsibilities. For boys, this could be a first hunt ritual, participation in a real battle, or a rigorous endurance test, testing their physical and spiritual strength. For girls, the first menstrual cycle became a significant event, accompanied by special rituals and wise instructions from the women of the clan, passing on the secrets of motherhood and keepers of the hearth. These rites not only marked maturation, but also firmly included the child in the cycle of tribal life, making him or her an integral part of a large community, united by blood ties, belief in spirits, and an inextricable connection with the native land. The upbringing of children was a universal affair in which the entire tribe participated. Children belonged not only to their parents, but were also under the care of elders, attentive neighbors, and close family friends. Every adult member of the tribe became part of a large and loving family for the child. In such an atmosphere, children grew up with an unwavering sense of security and deep belonging to their people. Interestingly, among some tribes, there was the concept of two spirits, referring to people who harmoniously combined masculine and feminine principles. Sometimes such qualities manifested themselves in early childhood. Instead of rejecting these special children, they were accepted and revered as possessing unique spiritual abilities. This attitude towards human nature vividly demonstrates the depth and wisdom of Native American culture, its tolerance and respect for the individuality of each person. In an era when the European view saw only backwardness in the indigenous people, societies flourished on the American continent, where women occupied a central place, embodying life and the continuation of the clan. Contrary to popular stereotypes, their role was not limited to a subordinate position. Women were a source of inner strength, keepers of ancient traditions, and guarantors of the future prosperity of the tribe. Every woman, whether a worker cultivating cornfields under the scorching sun, a wise grandmother passing on ancient tales by a crackling fire, or a child running carefree across the vast prairies or splashing in the cool waters of the river, all were an integral part of the great circle of life that the tribes of North America sought to preserve and pass on to their descendants. In this harmonious cycle, there was no room for superfluous or secondary roles. Every person, whether male, female, or child, represented an important link in a strong chain connecting generations, earth and sky, life and death, into a single whole. Chapter 4: Shamanism, Myths and Beliefs. Part 1: Spirits of Nature. In the worldview of the indigenous peoples of North America, there was no clear boundary between the sacred and the secular. For them, the earth itself served as a temple, and the vast sky was the majestic vault of the sanctuary. Everything that surrounded them, from the tiny beetle crawling on a blade of grass to the majestic mountains soaring upwards, was animated, filled with invisible spiritual power. Their beliefs were not bound by written dogmas, did not require the construction of cumbersome temples or the creation of a complex priestly hierarchy. Their sacred books were written by nature itself, on the rustling leaves of trees, in the murmur of streams, and in the singing of birds. Their religious hymns sounded in the harmonious chorus of nature, in the howling of the wind, in the whisper of foliage, and in the rumble of thunder. Faith was ubiquitous, permeating every aspect of their lives. At the heart of their worldview lay a deep belief in the spirits of nature, unseen but omnipresent forces that filled every corner of the universe. Every stone, majestic tree, wild animal, babbling brook, and imposing cliff possessed its own guardian spirit, endowed with a unique character and habits. In their understanding, there was no dead, inanimate matter. Gusts of wind could carry the whispers of ancestors, raindrops resembled the tears of Mother Earth, and the mighty bison became a symbol of unyielding strength and nobility. These spirits were not omnipotent deities like those worshipped in European religions. They were much closer to people, more accessible for communication, but at the same time demanded respectful treatment and prudence. The members of the tribes understood perfectly well that the spirit of the dense forest could provide invaluable assistance to a skilled hunter, but could also confuse him in an impassable thicket. The spirit of a high mountain could grant a seer a valuable vision, but could also unleash a devastating avalanche upon his head. Life itself was a continuous dialogue with these powerful forces, and every human action became an integral part of this complex conversation. One of the key concepts was the notion of the Great Spirit, a single and all-encompassing principle, invisible but permeating all that exists. In various indigenous languages, it was called differently: Wakantanka among the Sioux, Manitou among the Algonquins, and Arenda among the Iroquois. The Great Spirit was not a personified God, but rather an all-encompassing essence that permeated the entire universe. It did not punish or reward, but was the very breath of life, the foundation of all things. Along with the veneration of the Great Spirit, the beliefs of the indigenous peoples of North America placed great importance on the pantheon of ancestral spirits, as well as spirits representing animals, plants, and various natural phenomena. Ideas about the most significant spirits varied depending on the geographical location and traditions of each tribe. Thus, for the northern peoples, the spirits of the bear and moose were of particular importance. For the inhabitants of the plains, the spirits of the bison and eagle. In desert regions, the spirits of the coyote and snake were revered, and on the coast, the spirits of the whale and salmon. Spirits could manifest themselves in different ways. Some were benevolent and provided assistance. Others, on the contrary, were distinguished by a malicious disposition and a tendency to deception. It is noteworthy that in the mythology of many tribes, a special place was occupied by the image of the trickster, a cunning and mischievous spirit who violated established rules and sowed chaos, but at the same time was able to teach important life lessons. In the culture of the tribes inhabiting the plains, the role of the trickster was often assigned to the coyote, among the Iroquois, to the raven, and among the northwestern tribes, to the raven or bear. The connection between man and the world of spirits began from the very moment of his birth. The newborn was given a name not by chance, but in honor of a sign seen in a dream or an animal that appeared at the moment of birth. It was believed that the guardian spirit accompanies a person throughout his life, protecting him, endowing him with strength and wisdom. To establish a strong connection with the spirits, people performed special rituals and offered them gifts, such as tobacco, food, beautiful feathers, and skillfully crafted carvings. Entering the domain of the forest, the hunter uttered words of humility and gratitude to the spirit of the animal, asking for forgiveness and thanking him for the coming gift of sustenance. The fisherman, as a sign of respect for the spirits of the water element, sent the first catch into the depths as a dedicatory sacrifice. Gatherers of nature's gifts, whether berries or medicinal herbs, left modest offerings to the nourishing earth. Special sacredness was acquired by sacred corners of nature: hills, springs, ancient trees, mysterious caves, where tribes gathered for prayer appeals, rituals, and the search for prophetic revelations. These places held the memory of ancestors, intertwined with legends and mythological tales. Sometimes a person devoted days and weeks to solitary fasting and prayers, seeking to hear the voice of the spiritual world. The spirits of nature acted not only as a source of strength, but also as wise mentors. Through dreams, omens, and encounters with animals, they guided people on the right path. It was believed that an attentive person was able to catch the whisper of the universe, decipher warnings in the flight of a bird, in the outlines of clouds, or in the crackling of a campfire. A key place in this system was occupied by the concept of the great cycle of life. All that exists, humanity, the animal world, feathered creatures, arboreal giants, mountain ranges, rivers, was connected by invisible threads. The passing of one being gave rise to a new one, emphasizing that nothing exists in isolation from the whole. This philosophy, which underlies the worldview of many tribes, found its expression in rituals, songs, and legends passed down from generation to generation. Deep awareness and reverence for the spirits inhabiting nature was an integral part of the existence of Native American peoples, permeating all spheres of their lives, from obtaining food to raising the younger generation, from solemn ceremonies to military clashes. Disturbing the harmony in nature was considered the gravest sin, while greed, neglect, and ferocity were sure signs of a lost spiritual connection with the surrounding world. When European colonizers arrived on the continent, they saw only pagans and savages. They failed to recognize that the indigenous people lived in harmony with a world where every stone and blade of grass was animated. The newcomers did not realize that for these people, the land was not just property, but a nurturing mother, and the river was not a resource, but the lifeblood of the universe. In our days, when most of these ancient beliefs have been forgotten or preserved only in reservations and folklore, humanity should stop and listen. The spirits of nature, of which the Indians spoke, have not disappeared. They still dwell in the breath of the wind, the rustle of leaves, the murmur of streams. Their voices can be heard if one has the ability to listen. The spiritual heritage of the indigenous peoples of North America was based not only on rituals and prayers, but also on countless legends about those who lived on the earth long before the advent of man, who created the world or saved it from destruction, who guided people on the true path, the great animals. These legends were not just entertainment for young listeners. They represented a map of the universe, a code of moral principles, a chronicle of peoples, expressed in the language of beasts and birds. In the worldview of the indigenous people of America, animals and people were an inseparable whole, being equal members of a single life cycle. Animals were revered not only as biological beings, but also as embodiments of various qualities: power, intelligence, agility, and nobility. Legends about animals were not allegories, but a direct reflection of spiritual reality. Among the many characters in Indian mythology, a special place was occupied by the coyote, who enjoyed wide popularity among the tribes inhabiting the Great Plains, the southwestern lands, and the northwest coast. In myths, the coyote appeared in the multifaceted image of a trickster, a simpleton, and a mentor. His actions were often absurd, selfish, and deceitful, but ultimately led to positive results, or revealed important life lessons to people. The coyote was credited with creating the sun, but also with accidentally unleashing death into the world. He could steal fire from the gods to give it to humanity, or he could fall into traps because of his own insatiability. Through his mischievous antics and mistakes, the Indian tribes learned the laws of being. Deception and greed lead to misfortune. Cunning does not always surpass honesty, and even mistakes can provide valuable knowledge. Among the galaxy of outstanding mythological heroes, a special place is occupied by the raven, revered on the northwest coast and in the harsh Arctic lands as the creator of the universe. He is credited with creating the earth and humanity, giving light and water, and teaching people the art of obtaining food. The raven, embodying cunning, freedom, and independence, has deservedly become one of the key symbols of North American mythology. Legends of the Tlingit, Haida, Chilkat, and other peoples tell of how in primordial times the world was plunged into darkness until the brave raven stole light from a greedy old man who had locked it in a chest. Thanks to his ingenuity, he seized the sun, moon, and stars to generously bestow them upon people. His story is an inspiring tale of how light and knowledge become available to those who tirelessly strive for them despite all obstacles. No less significant a figure in the mythological pantheon is the bison. For the indigenous peoples of the Great Plains, this mighty animal was not just a source of food, but a sacred symbol embodying the strength, endurance, and generosity of nature itself. Myths say that in the beginning of time, the bison voluntarily sacrificed itself for the survival of people. Every part of its body was used in everyday life. Meat served as food, hides were used to make clothing and dwellings, and bones were turned into weapons and tools. A special place was occupied by the legend of the white bison, which must appear in the world in an era of trials and bring with it peace and renewal. The appearance of a white bison is still considered a sacred sign among the descendants of the Plains tribes, symbolizing hope and rebirth. In the cultures of many peoples of the world, the bear occupied a special, honored place. He was revered as the embodiment of power, courage, and incredible adaptability to the most severe environmental conditions. In some tribal societies, the bear was associated with figures of shamans, endowed with the gift of healing. It was believed that this creature possessed secret knowledge of medicinal herbs and could cure ailments. In ritual chants and ceremonies, tribes would invoke the spirit of the bear, praying for strength in battles or relief from diseases. In the mythological tales of Arctic peoples and northern tribes, the reindeer and caribou played a significant role. These animals were symbols of survival and self-sacrifice. It was believed that the reindeer willingly gave its life to the hunter if the hunter showed respect for nature and observed established rituals. Among the peoples inhabiting the Great Lakes region and the Northeast, there were legends of a giant, serpent-like monster dwelling in the depths of the lake waters. These legends served both as a warning and a reminder of the unbridled power of the aquatic element. Tribes of the Southwest passed down from generation to generation stories of the feathered serpent dragon, a creature finding refuge in caves and canyons. Its appearance foretold impending changes, which could bring either blessing or misfortune. Myths about the turtle were of no less significance. Among the Iroquois and other tribes of the Northeast, there was a widespread legend that the entire world rested on the shell of a giant turtle. In ancient times, according to legend, the earth was a boundless ocean, and only a brave turtle agreed to take upon its back an island that became the cradle of forests and home to humanity. This ancient parable symbolizes the fragility and interconnectedness of the universe, reminding us of the delicate balance of nature. It is worth noting that these myths were not static dogmas carved in stone. They lived and breathed, being retold around campfires, passed down from generation to generation, acquiring new meanings and interpretations. These stories served as a kind of life textbook for young generations, explaining why the heavens are illuminated by stars, why the wind roams the fields, why it is necessary to treat the animal world with care, taking only what is necessary for sustenance. Legends about majestic animals instilled in people a respectful attitude toward the environment and themselves. They taught that every action has consequences, that man is inextricably linked to all living beings, that life is a continuous cycle of gifts and sacrifices. And even today, if you close your eyes and listen to the rustling of leaves, the howling of the wind at night, or the melodic singing of birds, you can catch echoes of these ancient tales, because myths do not disappear without a trace. They continue to live in the world around us, just as they once lived in the hearts of people who called themselves children of the earth and sky. In every tribe, whether inhabitants of the Arctic expanses, prairies, southern swamps, or northern forests, there were chosen ones endowed with a special gift. These were people capable of hearing the whisper of spirits, understanding the language of the wind, reading signs in the flight of birds, and seeing the reflections of the moon on the water's surface. They were called by different names: medicine men, sorcerers, healers, but most often shamans. The shaman was not just a healer or magician. He acted as an intermediary between the ordinary world of human existence and the mysterious realm of spirits, serving as a conductor between tangible reality and the invisible forces permeating all things. His duties were complex and multifaceted. He was expected to heal ailments, predict future events, search for lost souls, conduct initiation rites, and protect the community from threats from the spiritual world. However, to be worthy of the title of shaman, it was not enough to have mere aspiration or a high position in society. Often, the path of the shaman began with a special sign that appeared to a child or a young person in the form of an unusual dream, a mystical vision, a lightning strike in close proximity, or a serious illness experienced on the verge of life and death. Sometimes, the future shaman showed a tendency toward solitude, unusual thoughts, and heightened observation from an early age. In some tribes, it was believed that the shaman does not choose his own destiny, but is chosen by the spirits. The process of learning shamanic art was long and fraught with great difficulties. The student was isolated from the rest of the community, subjected to severe trials, fasting, prayers, physical and psychological torment. His mentors were experienced shamans, but the main teacher remained the world of spirits. The aspirant to the title of shaman had to go through a special vision, a state of trance, when a patron spirit appeared to him and revealed the secret mysteries of the universe. The rite of obtaining a vision could last for days or even weeks. The young man secluded himself in remote mountains, dense forests, or dark caves, deprived of food and water, immersed in complete silence. In this state, he had to meet his spirit, an animal, the spirit of an ancestor, or the personification of a natural element, which would become his faithful guide and inexhaustible source of power. After the chosen one acquired the gift of clairvoyance, not only the burden of knowledge fell on his shoulders, but also a colossal responsibility to the world. From that moment on, his existence ceased to be a personal matter, transforming into service to higher powers and the needs of the community. In ordinary life, the shaman performed a wide range of duties, acting as a healer, advisor, and guide between worlds. Healing ailments was one of his most important tasks. He used the healing properties of plants, performed ritual ceremonies, and offered prayers. However, treatment was not limited to the use of natural remedies. It encompassed deeper aspects, such as cleansing the soul of impurity, expelling evil spirits, and restoring inner harmony and balance with the surrounding world. In the event of epidemics, droughts, or hunting failures, members of the tribe turned to the shaman for help. He organized special ceremonies during which he entered a trance, a special state of consciousness that allowed him to travel to other worlds. Various methods were used to achieve this state, including rhythmic drumbeats, ritual dances, drawn-out chants, and inhaling the smoke of sacred plants such as tobacco or other special herbs. One of the shaman's key instruments was song. Shamanic chants were not just a collection of melodies. They were powerful spells addressed to spirits, ritual formulas endowed with special power. Each song was passed down orally from generation to generation and could be used for healing, protection from evil, or summoning prophetic visions. Masks, amulets, and ritual costumes played a key role in shamanic rituals, endowing the shaman with special abilities. A mask depicting an animal or spirit allowed the shaman to transform into that being during the ceremony. A costume decorated with eagle feathers, bear teeth, or wolf claws served not just as a decorative element, but as a conductor of the power contained in the ritual. One of the most important ceremonies in which the shaman was the main actor was the sun dance among the tribes of the Great Plains. This complex ritual symbolized the renewal of life and the restoration of balance in the world. The sun dance, which lasted several days, included fasting, ritual dances, self-sacrifice, and prayers. Shamans led the ceremony, carefully monitoring its progress and spiritual significance. In other regions, there were similar rituals, such as rain dances among the tribes of the Southwest, potlatch feasts among the Northwestern peoples, and initiation ceremonies among the forest tribes. In all these ceremonies, the shaman occupied a central place, acting as an intermediary between the world of humans and the world of spirits. Soul journeys were of particular importance in shamanic practice. It was believed that if a person lost themselves, became ill, or got into trouble, their soul could get lost or be stolen by evil spirits. In this case, the shaman went to the spirit world to find and return the lost soul. This dangerous journey required great inner strength and courage from the shaman. However, the shaman's power was like a double-edged sword. He had the gift of healing, but he also had the power to inflict injury. In some tribes, there was a belief that a shaman could bring disease and sorrow down on the heads of his tribesmen if his anger or resentment reached a critical point. For this reason, the shaman was revered, but also feared. His position in society was very significant, but his existence was marked by a seal of alienation. He lived at the intersection of worlds, not belonging entirely to the world of humans or the world of spirits. In some cultures, there were entire institutions of shamans who passed on sacred knowledge orally from father to son. In others, he appeared as a lonely traveler, shrouded in an aura of mystery and superstitious fear. Today, shamanism ekes out a meager existence in isolated reservations and spiritual practices of the descendants of the continent's indigenous peoples. Many valuable pieces of information have disappeared into oblivion, the melodies of old songs have faded from memory, and rituals have undergone significant changes. Nevertheless, in the culture of the North American Indians, the shaman still embodies the connection between man and the incomprehensible, with what cannot be measured or rationally explained. It is a kind of reminder that the universe is not only what is visible to us, but also what we feel, perceive in silence, encounter in dreams, and signs sent by nature. For centuries, the world of the North American Indians lived according to its unwritten laws, in unison with the changing seasons and natural cycles, in harmony with the earth, the sky, and the spirits of ancestors. Their chronicle knew neither grandiose empires nor bloody conquests in the form that Europe knew them. Military conflicts were local in nature, and the boundaries between tribes were very conditional. Their wealth lay not in gold reserves, but in the wisdom passed down from generation to generation, and in the generous gifts of the environment. But in the 15th century, the usual course of things was disrupted. In the momentous year of 1492, Christopher Columbus, driven by a mistaken belief that he had reached the shores of Asia, anchored off the islands of the Caribbean. This event marked the beginning of a new chapter in human history, the era of European colonization, when the indigenous peoples of America first met face to face with newcomers from across the ocean. However, the tribes inhabiting North America did not immediately learn of the arrival of foreigners. It was not until the early 16th century that the first European ships approached the coasts of Canada and the northeastern part of the continent. The penetration of colonists into the interior of the mainland occurred much later. The first contacts between Europeans and Native Americans were marked by mutual curiosity and caution. To the Indians, the arriving people seemed like spirits who had come from distant lands. Their pale skin, unusual clothing, and formidable, incomprehensible weapons aroused surprise and apprehension. The Europeans, in turn, saw in the Indians not only exotic natives, but also potential allies, guides, and traders of valuable furs. One of the pioneers who set foot on the lands of the Northeast was Jacques Cartier, who explored the coasts of Canada in the 1530s. His expeditions marked the beginning of the first contacts with the Iroquois and Algonquin tribes, opening a new page in the relationship between two worlds. The initial contacts between Europeans and Native Americans were characterized by a peaceful exchange of gifts, including food, furs, and objects that were curious to both cultures. The age of exploration marked the beginning of active trade. French, English, Spanish, and Dutch colonists had an acute need for furs, especially valuable beaver pelts, which were in great demand in European markets. In return, the indigenous people received metal tools, fabrics, firearms, colorful beads, and alcoholic beverages. This trading network quickly spread throughout the northeast of the continent and the Great Lakes region. Soon, intermediary tribes emerged, controlling key trade routes and deriving significant benefits from the exchange. For peoples such as the Huron, Mohican, and Ojibwe, active participation in trade became the key to growing influence and strengthening power. However, along with valuable goods came deadly diseases, greed, and a fierce struggle for resources. The first clashes were not always peaceful. As the colonial presence expanded, conflicts inevitably arose over territories and hunting grounds. The fragile balance in the world of indigenous tribes was gradually disrupted. Some peoples became allies of the Europeans, pursuing their own interests, while others fiercely resisted the invaders. In the southwest of the continent, the Spanish first encountered the Navajo, Apache, and Pueblo tribes as early as the 16th century. The expedition of Francisco Vázquez de Coronado, organized in search of mythical cities of gold, led to the first bloody clashes. The Spanish conquistadors arrived with the aim of conquering new lands, seeking to convert the indigenous people to Christianity, subject them to their authority, and use them as disenfranchised labor. Initially, the indigenous people of the American continent were unaware of the true nature of those who had arrived. The strangers appeared to them as new spirits or messengers from other worlds, and the tribes could not even imagine what colossal changes this meeting would bring. There was a belief that these strangers were a transient phenomenon, only temporary guests who would sooner or later leave their lands. None of the Indians could have imagined that these first contacts would mark the beginning of the tragic decline of their familiar world. Christian missionaries played a special role in establishing ties with the Indians. Catholic and Protestant priests arrived in Native American settlements with the noble goal of converting their souls to their faith. For some tribes, missionaries became intermediaries between two cultures, mentors and teachers. However, their activities often led to the destruction of centuries-old foundations and traditions as they fiercely eradicated shamanic rituals, desecrated and destroyed sacred places, replacing ancient myths and legends with Christian dogmas. Along with the Europeans, not only new technologies penetrated the continent, but also deadly threats. Firearms radically changed the nature of intertribal wars, making them more bloody and destructive. Metal knives and axes gradually replaced traditional tools made of stone and bone. Alcohol, which quickly became a popular commodity, led to the disintegration of families and the destruction of communities. However, the most terrible danger was the diseases brought by the Europeans. Epidemics of smallpox, measles, influenza, and syphilis ruthlessly wiped out entire tribes. Native Americans had no immunity to these diseases, and mortality reached catastrophic proportions. Many historians and researchers believe that the indigenous population of North America decreased by 70 to 90% by the end of the 16th century. The initial contacts between the two worlds resembled a light breeze, foreshadowing an impending storm that would soon engulf the continent. Native Americans warmly welcomed the newcomers, exchanging gifts and sharing knowledge of their land and customs, unaware of the tragic consequences this encounter would bring. Explorers traversing the seas on their ships carried not only new goods and knowledge, but also a destructive force the native peoples were oblivious to. Beyond the shimmering horizons of hope lay armies of conquerors, deadly diseases, and a ravenous thirst for profit. The period of first contact between Europeans and Native Americans was fraught with both rosy illusions and tragic misconceptions. Many Aboriginal tribes naively believed they could benefit from these new relationships, strengthen their positions through alliances, and gain previously unattainable advantages. However, European civilization did not arrive on the continent for equal dialogue and mutually beneficial cooperation. Its aim was unconditional submission, total conquest, and the ruthless destruction of a unique world that had lived in harmony with nature for centuries. The initial tentative contacts soon escalated into a devastating hurricane, sweeping away everything in its path. The brief period of exchanging gifts, sharing meals, and marveling at exotic cultures was followed by a merciless era of epidemics and bloody wars. This tragic storm descended upon the tribes of North America, leaving no stone unturned in their former way of life. Disease was at the forefront of this destructive wave. Wherever a European appeared, smallpox invisibly followed, like an ominous shadow. Often the epidemic preceded the arrival of the colonizers, spreading with traders, slaves, and religious missionaries. A single infected traveler could cause the demise of entire settlements and tribes. Native peoples, who had never encountered such viruses before, lacked immunity and effective treatments. Smallpox, measles, influenza, and syphilis relentlessly decimated elders, warriors, children, and women, leaving behind only desolation and grief. At times, entire Native American settlements were wiped off the face of the earth in just a few weeks, as if by an invisible force. Along with diseases, war, brought by European conquerors, came to the continent like an ominous shadow. Europe introduced a new, brutal logic to the land of America: the seizure of territories, the subjugation of peoples, the establishment of borders, and unlimited power. Indian tribes, once living in harmony with nature, found themselves drawn into the complex game of European powers, becoming pawns in the trade of weapons and valuable furs, as well as in bloody wars for territory and resources. In the 17th and 18th centuries, dozens of conflicts erupted between the indigenous inhabitants and the ruthless colonizers. The Beaver Wars, in which the Iroquois fought fierce battles, were forever etched in the continent's history. For many years, the North American Indians waged wars with the Huron and Algonquin, seeking to establish control over the lucrative trade. Wars between the English colonies and tribes in Virginia and New England, as well as Pontiac's rebellion, were a desperate attempt to halt the relentless British expansion. Many of these conflicts arose from the insatiable European thirst for new lands. With each year, the colonies grew, attracting more and more settlers who arrived with their families, ready to cut down forests and build prosperous farms. What was sacred land and ancestral home to the Native Americans was merely territory to be developed and conquered for the colonizers. But the Indians did not surrender without a fight. They formed powerful alliances, organized daring raids, tried to negotiate peace, or offered fierce resistance to the invaders. Many of them displayed unprecedented heroism and martial valor, which were forever immortalized in legends. However, the forces were unequal. Modern weapons, deadly diseases, numerical superiority, and the treacherous divide and conquer policy gradually tore apart and destroyed the fragile world of the Indian tribes, dooming them to a tragic fate. By the turn of the 19th century, it became clear that the former face of North America was fading into the past, erased by the onslaught of relentless change. When the indigenous people of this continent first encountered foreigners arriving from the eastern shores, they could not have imagined that these contacts would mark the beginning of the tragic decline of their world, their civilization. However, by the beginning of the 19th century, this tragedy had become irreversible, becoming a harsh reality. Following the devastating epidemics and bloody wars came the most agonizing loss, the loss of land, the basis of their existence, and the destruction of a unique culture that had been formed in harmony with nature for centuries. To Europeans, land represented property, a valuable commodity to be bought, sold, or seized in bloody battles. In the minds of Native Americans, the earth was a mother, a sacred home, an integral part of their being. They could not grasp the very concept of selling land. It was incomprehensible to them how one could sell a life-giving river, an ancient forest, or a sacred rock. New laws, treacherous treaties, and forced relocations transformed sacred ancestral lands into soulless plots on paper, devoid of all spiritual meaning. Starting in the mid-15th century, a ruthless policy of forcibly displacing Indians from their ancestral territories unfolded, a policy aimed at destroying their identity. In the southeastern United States, the Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, and other indigenous peoples were subjected to the so-called removal policy, becoming victims of greed and cruelty. In 1830, the infamous Indian Removal Act was passed, becoming an instrument of genocide, resulting in the forced expulsion of thousands of people from their native lands and their dispatch on a long and deadly journey to the Western Territories into the unknown. This tragic march went down in history as the Trail of Tears, a symbol of suffering and injustice. From relentless cold, raging diseases, and agonizing hunger, thousands of men, women, and children perished, becoming innocent victims of a ruthless policy. On the vast Great Plains, the expansion of white settlers resulted not only in territorial losses for indigenous peoples, but also in a genuine ecological tragedy. European hunters, incited by the policies of the governments of the United States and Canada, launched a merciless extermination of the once countless herds of bison, which were the cornerstone of the economy and spiritual culture of the indigenous tribes of the prairies. The demise of the bison meant not only the loss of a source of food and materials for making clothing and utensils, but also the undermining of the very foundations of the identity and traditional way of life of these peoples. Simultaneously, a deliberate policy of cultural assimilation unfolded, aimed at forcibly dissolving the Indians into an alien culture. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Native American children were torn from their families and placed in special boarding schools, where they were forced to renounce their native language, forget the customs of their ancestors, and abandon traditional beliefs. Children were given European names, forcibly had their hair cut, which was a symbol of freedom and spiritual strength, and were strictly forbidden to speak their native language, depriving them of connection with their own past and cultural heritage. These infamous boarding schools left an indelible mark on the destinies of entire generations, inflicting deep emotional wounds, many of which have not healed to this day. Along with the loss of land and native languages, the richest examples of oral folk art irretrievably disappeared into the past. Ancient songs, epic tales, and sacred rituals. Shamans, spiritual leaders, and keepers of ancient knowledge were declared charlatans and persecuted. Sacred dances, used to connect with the spirits of ancestors and the forces of nature, were universally banned, and traditional spiritual practices were ridiculed and eradicated as relics of savagery. By the end of the 20th century, the territory of North America was finally divided, and the indigenous peoples were assigned the role of reservations, small, isolated patches of land that became a symbol of their former greatness and current dependence. Tribes that once freely roamed the vast prairies eked out a miserable existence in conditions of poverty and complete dependence on the decisions of the federal government, having lost not only land but also a significant part of their culture and identity. Despite all the hardships and deprivations, the indigenous peoples of North America managed to survive. Their distinctive culture, although affected by historical events, continues to live in melodic songs, mesmerizing dances, transmitted oral traditions, and mysterious rituals held away from prying eyes. The history of the loss of land and cultural heritage represents not only the personal tragedy of the indigenous population, but also a universal human loss. Humanity has lost unique knowledge about harmonious coexistence with nature and wisdom about the eternal cycle of life, which cannot be fully recreated. A look into the past of the indigenous peoples of North America reveals not only a picture of loss, but also the greatness of their civilization. Before the colonization of the continent, there was a world where people lived not in noisy cities, but in vast prairies, dense forests, and picturesque valleys. The laws of this world were dictated by nature itself, not written in ink. The earth was a mother, the bison was a brother, the tree was a teacher, and death was not the end, but a transition to another world. This world, unfortunately, is gone, but it has left an indelible mark. He dissolved into the languages that still echo in the songs of the elders, in the exquisite patterns on blankets and ornaments, in the ritual dances of descendants. He lives in the stories passed down from generation to generation, in the rustling of leaves, in the mountain paths, and in the silence of the prairies. The history of the indigenous peoples of North America serves as a reminder of the fragility of cultures and the vulnerability of life. It warns of how easily an entire world can be erased if viewed from the position of a conqueror, rather than from the position of a friend and neighbor. At the same time, it is a narrative of unwavering strength of spirit, of the ability of peoples who have endured trials of disease, military conflicts, forced relocations, and the destruction of cultural heritage, not only to survive, but also to preserve their identity. They continue to speak their native languages, pass on the memory of their ancestors from generation to generation, and perform songs that celebrate the greatness of the surrounding world. There is much to learn from these peoples, not only a careful attitude towards nature, but also a holistic perception of the world, where humanity is not an all-powerful master, but only a part of a single, interconnected life cycle. Memories of these people should live not as a frozen exhibit in a museum collection, but as an integral part of historical memory, as a reminder that any civilization, no matter how powerful it may seem, can disappear from the face of the earth. Therefore, it is necessary to take care of what we have and to see in others not potential enemies, but those with whom we share a common living space on this planet.